Did I open a portal? Or an attachment? Before I start my story, let me give you some background. My whole life I've been surrounded by the paranormal. My grandma's house was extremely haunted, and my family always watched shows like Ghost Adventures, and recently I've been playing ghost hunting games on my PC. That being said, I've also loved watching horror movies such as The Conjuring and Insidious. About 3 years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to watch all the Conjuring universe movies in chronological order, as well as the Insidious movies. We did this over the span of a few days. After the first day, we were excited to do it again. The second day, we began to feel uneasy. And by the third session, we had a feeling like we were constantly being followed and watched. What made it extra weird is that we didn't live together, so we felt like this by ourselves in our own homes, and together at my home. After that third night, she went home, and we went to bed. I ended up having a nightmare that night that involved demons, and as an 18-year-old at the time, I decided to sleep on the couch, and my mom joined me. While I was grabbing my things and finished up in the bathroom, I walked downstairs. I saw a shadow that looked as if it was crouched down and peeking into the glass patio door that was covered by a curtain. I jumped and quickly ran to the patio door in fear that someone might be trying to scope our home to break in. But when I opened the curtains, no one was there. The shadow was gone. I told my mom, and she was so tired that she just blew it off. So now I'm laying down freaked, and after an hour of not being able to sleep, I decided to go back upstairs. As I got to the stairs, I looked back at the curtains, and there it was again. The shadow was crouched down, as if it was peeking at me. I moved my arms to make sure it wasn't my shadow, and I can confirm that it wasn't mine. I quickly ran back into my room and was scared out of my mind. I told my mom the next morning that I had seen it again, and she said, "Oh, it was probably just a ghost, because it turns out when I was younger, I would claim to see shadows run past our curtains all the time." Here's where it gets worse. My girlfriend and I decided to go to her house for the night, which would give us a break from the horror movies. While I sat on our family's rocking chair, my girlfriend was in their pantry looking for some snacks. From my point of view, I could see the kitchen counter from the corner of my eye but couldn't see my girlfriend. And from her perspective, she could see the counter but not me. While we were doing our own thing, I saw what appeared to be a black figure, crouched on top of the counter. Long fingers with massive nails, and it looked as if it was wet with how it was shinning. I quickly flinched and screamed, "What the hell?" And as I moved my head to look at it directly, it was gone in a blink of an eye. My girlfriend ran over to me and I told her what I saw, and she said she saw a black figure on the counter too, but didn't get as good of a look as I did. When her mom got home, she blessed the house, and we stopped watching horror movies from that day on, and they ended up moving. She's still my girlfriend, and doesn't experience anything anymore, but I still feel like I'm being followed, whether it's in my home or someone else's. Even in my own car, I feel like someone is in the back seat. I was 18 when this happened, and I'm still dealing with this as a 22-year-old now. I truly believe I saw a demon that day, and I'll never forget it. My best friend turned into a demon. Me and my friend both have OSSD, a disorder that splits the brain into different alters and identities to make it function better or cope with trauma. But different alters aren't always exactly the most normal. We were on holidays at a nice cottage for Christmas, and all was going well. Until it was after dinner and getting late, we were getting ready for bed and my friend had to use the toilet. They walked out pretty chill, but when they came back, they were crawling on all fours. I thought that they were playing a prank on me or something, as they were laughing a lot. But the laughter turned into wheezes and groans, of what sounded like agony and terror. I then knew something was definitely not right, and this was not my friend, or the main altar of their system I was besties with. I thought about everyone in their system, but no one would act like this. Perhaps a new altar had split. I turned the light on, but it started screaming in a way that made my blood curdle. Lights off then. The screaming quieted down after the lights were off, and I sat back on my bed and watched. I asked if anyone else could hear me in there, and please, for the love of God, to send a different altar out to front. Watching from my bed, the dark figure in the unlit room crawled around, while growling and occasionally letting out a choked-up wheeze. It was walking around in circles and snarling like a rabid dog. It wasn't necessarily snarling at me though, more like a dying, wounded animal. It started to chew on the bedpost of my friend's bed, but as we were only renting this cottage, I would not like to explain to the owner why the beds are chewed up. So I threw a packet of biscuits that we were eating towards it, and it tried to eat it, packet and all, at first until it worked out how to open it. It ate a few, then nudged the remaining ones in the packet towards me with its head. I have seen some very weird shit in my lifetime, but seeing my friend's disfigured shape, in the dark crawling around, snarling, and nudging biscuits towards me was certainly new. A bit later it tried to drink out of a water bottle but spilt some on the floor. I again didn't want any damage to occur to the property, so I scolded it. It seemed to feel bad. Later I ended up spilling some water myself, and it watched me clean it up with a towel. It then grabbed a towel and tried to clean up the spillage it made earlier. So it was certainly not hostile to me, but I still felt very uncomfortable. I am also schizophrenic, so seeing this whole person crawling around, growling at the end of my bed, triggered me into a small episode. I was hit with an adrenaline rush, and my brain was trying to send out protective altars from the stress. I was also considering knocking it out, and seeing if someone else would front when it woke up. Or just locking it outside, but again my friend and the rest of their system was still in there, so I couldn't risk it running off. Over an hour passed. It had seemingly fallen asleep on the cold wooden floor, while I was still too on edge to sleep. Eventually, it stood up. Since when could this thing stand? Then it spoke. All right, my friend was back. We talked about what happened and ended up laughing about it, despite it being slightly traumatic. Apparently that thing looks like a weird rabid demon dog inside the headspace, and is now banned from fronting. My friend gave me full permission to post this, and wow, that was certainly quite the experience. The Bushwhacker. Several weeks ago, me and my friend set out on a backpacking trip in a nearby state forest. The both of us are very experienced with both backpacking, and this specific area of forest we had picked, so we decided to go after work on a Friday, which would leave us hiking most of the 10 miles to the campsite in the dark. The area is very touristy, so pitching a tent anywhere besides the designated camp area wasn't an option, and would definitely result in a large ticket from a passing ranger if caught. This wasn't an issue though, since we often start hiking in the dark when we try to chase the sunrise on long backpacking trips, so arriving just before sunset didn't really make any difference to us. So, we met up on the day of, and set out driving to the state forest. The issues with this trip began there. We ran into terrible rush hour traffic on the highway to the park, due to an overturned tractor trailer which set us back an additional 30 minutes of daylight, in what would already be a hike that was intended to be mostly in darkness. Other than this, we arrived at the park without a hiccup and found a spot right away. Then we made our way over to the trailhead and began our ascent. As we hiked and the sky grew dark, there appeared to be an unforeseen storm blowing in from the north. We had anticipated there to be rain later in the night, but it seemed that the front had blown southward, and we were seeing rain earlier than what the forecast in the morning of the trip had projected. It began to rain, which wouldn't have been a big deal, but the rain shower turned to a total downpour. We stopped under a tree, where it was semi-dry, to turn out the rain layer on our packs, and debate whether it was worth it to continue. We reminisced about a time where we got caught in a heavy downpour, during a trip not unlike this one, in the Cumberland Gap a few years prior, and decided to keep going, so long as there was no thunder. However, as we were walking, about a mile up from our discussion, I noticed that the rain was permeating my old raincoat, due to a large tear it had suffered while we were crossing a rock squeeze, and I was beginning to get wet under it. I complained about this to my friend, and he suggested that since we've hiked in the area so frequently, that we try to walk off-trail to the campsite, since it would be a more direct route. To an inexperienced hiker, this would have been an insane idea, but we had both been in the area enough where we knew that the ascent would be harder, but more direct, and there were no cliffs in the way. So, we veered off the trail and began using map and compass navigation to find the campsite. We determined that there would be several checkpoints that we would come across, as long as we stayed on the same general path. A creek, an archaeological site for an old town, and another trail that ran directly into the campsite. Once we found the creek, we were able to walk upstream to orient ourselves with a landmark on the creek referenced on the map, catch a bearing with the compass based on that, and keep going from there. At this point, the pouring rain had let up into a lighter shower. It honestly wasn't that bad marching through the forest, to the point where we joked back and forth that they had purposefully made the trail harder than moving linearly to the campsite, since this part of the forest was a very flat basin between two mountains. After some time of trudging through the damp wilderness, we came across the archaeology site. The town itself had a colonial past and existed up until the 1940s, when the state consolidated the surrounding parkland and made the few residents leave. All that remains now are the abandoned buildings from the 1900s, and several dig sites of building foundations from the 18th and 19th centuries, with the single road out of the town that had been torn up to create more natural trails and forest roads. We emerged from the woods on the opposite side of the town that we had needed to be, and started making our way down the road, to where we could orient ourselves in the correct direction to move toward the last landmark we would use to get to the campsite. We decided that this spot in the town would be a good place to break for a few minutes to drink water and use the bathroom, since the rain had quieted from earlier, and I watched my friend walk slightly out of sight to use the bathroom as I sat on some logs that were arranged to act as a bench as I waited for him. I sat there for some time before I heard him running back in a panic. Thinking that he saw a bear, I quickly mounted my pack and jogged over to meet him to ask him what happened. He told me that he was near the old church, at the end of the road on the edge of town, and heard a strange noise to his left and saw several sets of glistening eyes, only to turn his headlamp and see that nothing was there. I saw he was really frightened, so I suggested we just keep moving. I personally thought it was probably some deer that scurried away before he turned his light. Deer have glistening eyes at night when there's a light source like a headlamp nearby. He agreed, and we started in the direction of the trail that we would intersect with. This part of the hike would be significantly more challenging, since we had to begin climbing the mountain, which would be an ascent of about 900 feet of net elevation gain from where we were approaching from, but at a very steep angle since we were off of any trail. This would go on for slightly less than a mile until we hit the ridge that the trail ran on. As we were climbing the ridge, and about 500 feet from the trail, we began to hear a scurrying behind us, which panicked my friend again. We stopped and switched off our headlamps to look behind us, and before my own eyes, there were those glistening eyes my friend had described to me back at the town. I turned on my headlamp and yelled, only to find that nothing was there. Now I was extremely panicked and told my friend that we needed to hurry to the trail quickly. We started in a sprint up the side of this mountain, but periodically we would stop to turn around to see the glistening eyes again. At this point, I had unsheathed the hatchet on my pack that I use for splitting firewood, and we began to more slowly make our way to the top as my friend led me up, holding a strap on the back while I was watching behind us, trying to walk backwards up the side of the slope. Eventually, We made it to the top of the ridge where we met the trail. We turned around and again saw these eyes. There were more of them from my last sighting, but we were no longer being pursued. They remained several hundred feet down the ridge where we were minutes prior. At that instant, a shrieking noise that sounded like hundreds of cicadas emanated from the same direction, and the eyes had disappeared from our sight. Me and my friend didn't even say anything, or look at one another, as we both took off running for the campsite now that we were on the level trail. When we got to the campsite, we were relieved to see that other people were there but said nothing of the incident to them. We figured they would probably take us as skittish flatlanders that got scared from a pack of deer. We set up camp extremely close to others that had set up there for the night, but by morning it was clear that neither of us really slept, as my friend shared when we were preparing breakfast. We eventually decided against the original itinerary for the following day, and tagged along with another group since they were heading to the same parking lot to leave. When we got off the mountain, we went straight to a park office to get some clarity on what had happened the night before. We tried as level-headedly as possible to explain to the ranger at the desk what had happened the night prior, but the ranger started to talk about bears in the area and how it was foolish of us to be off trail at night, which was probably true. When we pressed further about how we had seen bears before, and this incident was no bear, the ranger switched his tone. He began to intensely ask us about our whereabouts during the occurrence, and based on his line of questioning, it was clear to me that he had no interest in what happened, and was trying to get an angle to write us a ticket for being at the archaeology site. This had happened to me before when talking to rangers, since they can get pretty ticket-happy due to the park being so well-traveled. I immediately broke off the conversation and insisted the ranger was probably right about it being a bear, and admonished myself and my friend for being out at night. We left the ranger station with even more questions than answers about the night prior, but we avoid that area entirely now when hiking or backpacking in that park, especially at night. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed these stories, please subscribe and hit the like button. I will see you next time on The Dark Side of My Room.